False and misleading information is found all around us in our current world. It exists in our mainstream media, social media, advertisements, and even in our memes. This false information problem is complex, and labels like fake news can overgeneralize, confuse, and scare people. But false information isn't always black and white, and oftentimes spreads faster the more logical or factual it seems. This creates a distorted image of reality that's almost impossible to fully understand. Especially now, during periods of crisis such as global pandemics, is when we need to be able to trust our information the most. So in an environment that's polluted with false information, how can you know if it's even safe to trust your news sources? The information which we each have access to on a daily basis continues to increase as time goes by. This increase in access to information mixed with a sense of distrust in mainstream media has aided in fueling the growing amount of mis- and disinformation we are subject to. Because of how prevalent false and misleading information in our current environment can be, it is more important now than ever that we as a society correctly define the terms being thrown around. Fake news, in particular, is a term constantly being thrown around, even though its definition is unclear, as well as the fact that it is occasionally used as a tool which frequently leads to further confusion. In order to have a more clear conversation on the subject, we present three terms that more clearly define the different categories of information disorder, namely mis, dis, and malinformation. Misinformation is when false information is shared, but no harm is intended. An example of misinformation would be the common old wives' tale that touching a baby bird or other animal will cause the parents to abandon it. This is a false claim that has spread so far and wide that you may have even reacted out loud to hearing that it's untrue. You may have also repeated this piece of information to others without even realizing you were spreading misinformation. Disinformation is when false information is knowingly shared to cause harm. A great example of this would be if a person, a group of people, or even a country decided to cause fear and instability by intentionally circulating false information regarding COVID-19. The false information these bad actors spread could involve anything from how 5G towers cause COVID-19 to Bill Gates wanting to insert a microchip into individuals getting vaccinated. This would be classified as disinformation because the information is both entirely baseless as well as being a potential force for harm should a significant portion of a nation's population fall victim to such disinformation. Malinformation is when information based on reality is shared in a deliberate attempt to cause harm to a person, organization, or country. A hypothetical example of malinformation would be if a media organization showed footage of a plane crash with Arabic speakers in the background exclaiming Allahu Akbar repeatedly in an attempt to incite anger over alleged Islamic terrorism. The footage would be real, but considering that many outside of the Arabic and Islamic world consider the phrase to be synonymous with Islamic terrorism, not explaining the fact that the phrase Allahu Akbar is most often used in the same way that the phrase Oh my God is used would be a clear attempt to stoke further distrust or hate for the Islamic community. Similar to how a biological ecosystem can be affected by pollutants, an information ecosystem can be harmed by exposure to the various forms of mis, dis, and malinformation. An example of how pollutants harm real-life ecosystems would be, when microorganisms eat microplastics, then many fish eat said microorganisms which are each carrying a small quantity of microplastics. Then if bigger fish like tuna consume a multitude of these contaminated fish, then the concentration of microplastics will increase as they travel through the food chain. Humans then consume some tuna with the total sum of the microplastics from the many fish that it preyed upon as well as the many microorganisms consumed by all of the fish that the tuna consumed. Human waste and garbage then contains further plastic, which gets broken down and eventually consumed by even more microorganisms in the ocean. The cycle degrades the health of the ecosystem as the concentration of microplastics increases. Mis- and disinformation act in a similar way, increasingly polluting the information ecosystem as they are consumed. Bad actors are using increasingly sophisticated methods to capture people's attentions, both through advancements in technology like more realistic deepfakes and an increased understanding of human psychology. As incredible as the human brain is, it is far from perfect. There are ways of tricking you into becoming more trusting of the information that you receive. According to Dr. Claire Wardle, the most effective disinformation has always been that which has a kernel of truth to it. In other words, half-truths are more believable than completely made-up stories, and bad actors are more often reframing legitimate content to create new narratives rather than making up stories from scratch. Additionally, Dr. Wardle states, our brains are wired to rely on heuristics or mental shortcuts to help us judge credibility. As a result, our brains are more likely to trust information that is familiar or repeated to us because it is easier to rationalize as being credible and helps us more quickly absorb the information. It's not just everyday consumers of information who are being affected by mis- and disinformation. The difficulty consumers experience in their search for trustworthy and accurate information is a real struggle that impacts everyone in the information chain. This even applies to the journalists whose very purpose it is to be the conveyors of accurate information. In a study conducted by the Institute for the Future, researchers found that more than 80% of journalists admitted to falling for false information online. In the same study, only 14.9% of the journalists surveyed said they had been trained on how to best report on misinformation. Mis-, dis-, and malinformation can lead to people making decisions based on inaccurate information, which could have negative consequences on themselves or on others. An example of this would be when untested treatments for COVID-19 like hydroxychloroquine were discussed by certain outlets as being of great promise in treating the disease, resulting in unknown and potentially harmful effects on individuals who use such treatments. What can be done to take action? Because of the sheer amount of information available to us, we are constantly being exposed to mis- and disinformation. Unfortunately, the spread of mis- and disinformation does not appear to be going away anytime soon. But what can we, as individuals, do to protect ourselves inside of a polluted information ecosystem? An important starting point is to be aware of the issue at hand. Because of this, we recommend that you do further self-research regarding this subject. This is also a systemic issue, and we are reliant on governments, journalists, and companies such as Twitter and Facebook to protect us against mis- and disinformation. Until our world develops the proper protections against information disorder, there are effective methods that you can use to operate as a consumer within this polluted information ecosystem. 1. Validate your sources. Imposter content, content whose purpose is to look similar to credible sources, is just one type of disinformation. The technology that bad actors use in order to fool you is only getting more advanced. Just confirming that your information comes from a known, credible source is a big step in fighting disinformation. 2. Don't share information unless you know it is accurate. Do your due diligence before sharing. Fact check and search for any biases in your sources. Sharing information can impact other people's beliefs and behaviors, so make sure that you don't contribute to the spread of misinformation. 3. Don't rely solely on one source for information. Using multiple sources can reduce the likelihood of falling for false or misleading content. By searching for multiple sources of information, you can also develop a greater understanding of the world around you and avoid falling victim to echo chambers. If you found this video to be informative and entertaining, we would greatly appreciate if you liked, commented, and subscribed. Also, feel free to hit that bell icon to be notified of our future uploads. Support us on Patreon as well. This will help us produce higher quality and a higher quantity of videos.